are in listen-only mode.
Greetings to all participants around the world. I am Britt, Ajvazi, Product Marketing Manager for GRC at PECB International. Thank you for taking some time off your busy schedules to participate in this webinar on Essential Management Collection, how ISO 38500, ISO 31000, ISO 20000, ISO 21500, and ISO 55001 work together, brought to you by PECB. Today's presenter is Mr. Peter Davis, the principal of Peter Davis and Associates, a management consulting firm specializing in IT governance, security, and audit. Before Mr. Davis continues to elaborate more on his professional background, during this webinar session, please write any questions or comments you may have in the chat box in the control panel on your screen, and Mr. Davis would be glad to respond to a couple at the end depending on the time left, and the rest through email. Thank you. Mr. Peter Davis, you may proceed with the session.
Thanks, Britt. That's quite a title. I challenge everybody to say it 3 times as quickly as they can. Thanks for everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. As Britt said, my name is Peter Davis, and I'm the principal of Peter Davis and Associates, which is an authorized training organization for PECB. As well, I'm an accredited trainer, and I do ISO 27001, 20000, 27005, 31000, 9001, among other things. Today, I want to talk to you about the various standards that I listed, but really what I wanted to get across is this concept of how these things are integrated together. Because people think of them as, you know, I'm doing 20,000 and I'm getting certified 20,000, I'm getting certified 9,001, I'm getting certified 27,001. But what we're really trying to do is to create a complex ecosystem within our organization made up of a number of processes which interact with each other. So to do that, to get that across to you today, I'm going to talk about what does ISO call the IT management standards. And once I introduce those to you, then we'll talk about the ones I'm going to talk to you today about. As well, I will give you a very quick overview on what is governance, because we're going to start with ISO 38500, which is governance of IT for the organization. Once we understand governance, then we'll look at management. Now, these are 2 different things within your organization. You have some governance processes and you have some management processes. And so we'll try to explain those very quickly to you so that we can move on to start to talk about the governance and management standards that are enumerated on the first slide. And then most important is I'm going to try to show you how these work together. Now, we only have 45 minutes, so it's going to be at a very high level, but it is my attempt to show you how they work together. Now, ISO does make available a book or a document that you can download, and it's called the Integrated Use of Management System Standards. So we're going to talk about some management systems. We're going to talk about 20,000, 27,001. These are management systems. Now, you could pay 38 Swiss francs, or approximately $41 US, to purchase this document, or you can listen to me to the end and save yourself the money. Now, in addition to offering that document, the ISO has also offered a set of standards. So you can get general management standards, and you can get IT management standards. And you can see on this slide, which is reproduced from their site, it says the IT management collection. And so it says it's a portfolio of standards that extends the successful collection on information security management. So that means to me I'm going to get the information security management standards, and you see that that's there. As well, I'm going to get a governance standard, access to 38500. As well, I'm going to get access to project management, so that would be ISO 21500. I'm going to get access to the service management standards, which would be the ISO 20000-1 to whatever. And as well, it says I'm going to get access to the risk management. I'm going to get access to records management and all the software engineering standards, which there are quite a few of. As well, I'm going to get access to ISO 22301 because it says business continuity and disaster recovery. As well, we'll get some on energy efficiency and the mother of all these standards, the ISO's 9000 series. So again, an individual can sign up for this if you so choose, and you can purchase it, and it costs you 488 Swiss francs, or 500 US dollars approximately. So, and you could access this collection for a whole year. So instead of buying them for, say, 50 Swiss francs a piece, you can have access to all of them for the year for 488 Swiss francs. So today, I'm just going to talk to you about, I'm going to talk to you very quickly about these 6 standards, starting out with the governance standards, so 38500. And you can see that some of them say information technology, which means they're specifically for information technology people. Other ones, like 31000, don't have information technology as part of the title, so they're more generic in nature, as is 21500, which is guidance on project management. You notice also that some of these standards on this page say management system, and then they're usually followed by dash requirements. So these are the ones that we could be certified. So on this page, you'll see 20,000-1, 27,001, and 55,001. So these are ones that we could be certified to. The others are guidance or best practice or good practice, or in some way help us to develop our ecosystem within our organization. Now remember, what we're supposed to do with these, and all of this whole set that I'm showing you on this page, is we want to adopt them, we want to adapt them, and we want to align them to our organization. So again, that is our challenge, is to say, which set do I need? How do I use them within my organization? And that obviously can't be covered in 45 minutes. So let's start at sort of the beginning and talk about this concept of governance, and then we're going to work our way down through a framework to get through the 6 standards that I had on the previous slide. So the IFAC, which is International Federation of Accountants, has defined enterprise governance. It says that enterprise governance constitutes the entire accountability framework of the organization. So what we're looking for is an accountability framework, an internal control framework, or something like that. And it also says that it identifies, or this document also identifies 2 dimensions, and we see the 2 dimensions here. We have the conformance dimension, and as you can see from the left-hand side of the diagram, we're focusing on accountability and assurance. And we also have the performance, or the business governance part of this, where we focus on value creation and resource utilization. So I'll have one slide on on value creation, and we'll talk a little bit about how the COBIT at least defines value creation, because we find that every standard sort of has a different way of defining, but when you really look at them, they all come down to the same thing. So the corporate governance, or conformance, covers issues such as how do I organize my organization? What are the governing bodies? So I have my board, I have my IT steering committee, I have a strategy committee. So I have to develop my structure, as well as all the roles and functions and within my organization. And as well, we focus on executive remuneration. So how do we reward the people? And these days, people are looking at things like balanced scorecard to assist in that. The performance dimension focuses on the strategy. So one of the things when we look at our ISO 38500, the governance standard, we'll talk about strategy. I mean, we have to start with goals and then develop objectives, and then we have to develop strategy to support the goals and objectives. And so what we're doing is we're focusing on strategy and value creation, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that's important. If you're not creating value, then stop doing it. Use the money in other ways within your organization, right? And as part of this, we also have to understand how to make decisions. So we have to have a decision-making framework. We have to understand the appetite for risk and what are the drivers, performance, et cetera, et cetera. So we have these 2 components, enterprise governance, and we have enterprise governance, and it's broken down into corporate governance and business governance. So governance is about meeting strategic objectives, which is the performance aspect of it, while meeting our legal and regulatory, contractual, and other obligatory requirements that are often supported by policies, which is the conformance part of it. So our challenge in our organization is to achieve both in a balanced way. So we have many stakeholders in our organizations, and they have different views about these various things. And as the CIO or somebody on the board dealing with information technology. It's our challenge is to negotiate these different stakeholders to have the right balance between performance and conformance. So let's start with a corporate or an enterprise governance framework. Now I list two here, COSO, which is typically thought of as American, COCO, which is Canadian, and there are others like Cadbury, King 3. I mean, there's many different enterprise frameworks. I'm going to just start with talking about a little bit about COSO. So COSO became an acronym, but it was really the Treadway Commission because the chair was named James Treadway, and he had a long and distinguished career in the financial marketplace in the United States. Now the sponsoring organizations, because COSO stands for the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, were the 5 organizations that dealt with accounting and audit. And they wanted to get ahead of all the governments, or at least the U.S. government, federal and state, I guess, and self-regulate their industry before the government jumped in. So they developed this COSO framework, and it was called the Internal Control Framework, and then after that they created an Enterprise Risk Management Framework. And they were hoping to, as I said, to stave off the governments from passing laws. But as we know, the rest is history. They took part of the COSO framework and made it into a law and called it the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. But this is a start of the development of an internal control framework in your organization. Now, wherever you have an asset in your organization, and information technology and information are assets, or you might also have money, you might have intellectual property, you might have facilities. So wherever you have assets in your organization, you need to have a governance program in place. So I'm going to start with ISO 38500 because this is the governance of IT. Now, to support ISO 38500, we see something that provides a little bit more information than just that provided in 38500, which is a framework from ISACA called COBIT 5. Now, COBIT 5 covers a number of processes, 37 to be accurate, and these standards cover things like security, deliver and support. It covers things like assessment, capability assessments, and it covers things like 9126, which is software development standards, right? So we have a number of standards out there, and these standards in turn tend to be supported by things like ITIL for service management, and we have CMMI, which is an implementation of ISO 15504, and we see other standards as well. Now, it behooves you as an organization to come up with your own set of standards and those that are applicable to your organization, and the supporting methods and frameworks like ITIL and COBIT and other things that you need to create your internal control framework in your organization. As you can see, part of ITIL also is information security management, which is given to us in ISO 27001, which is an information security management system. And then 27002, we get a code of practice, which tells us these are the sort of the best practices for people in information security management. Overarching at the top, you see 9001, and I just put it out there because it's applicable to every one of our processes. So security has to have quality built in. Software development has to have security built in. Service delivery has to have quality built in. So everything has to have quality. So this is a simple methodology of how we might break these frameworks down. So in order to proceed for the rest of the session, I thought it would be maybe easier if I could show you a simple framework and then work down the framework to show you the various standards that we're talking about. And to do that, I decided to pick on, or to use COBIT 5 as a frame of reference for our discussion today. Luckily for us, it also follows the ISO 15504 standard. So you can see the model here. It's broken up into 2 areas. We have the processes for the governance of enterprise IT, and then we have the processes for management of enterprise IT. So we have 5 at the top, and we have 32 at the bottom. As well, you can see that it's broken down into 5 domains. We have the EDM, Evaluate, Direct, and Monitor domain. We have the Align, Plan, and Organize domain. We have the Build, Acquire, and Implement domain. We have the Deliver, Service, and Support domain. And we have the Monitor, Evaluate, and Assess domain. And so we have these various domains, but where we're going to start is at the top. We're going to talk about the governance of enterprise IT. or the governance of IT. And you can see that COBIT has five processes. The one we're going to focus on first is EDM01, which says ensure governance framework setting and maintenance. So we have to develop a governance framework of some kind. So to help us with that, we have our ISO 38500. The standard talks about conformance of the organization. Remember, going back to conformance and performance being part of our enterprise governance. So this focuses on the conformance of the organization. The standard states directors should be held accountable. So we're talking about accountability by the directors themselves for breaches of security standards, privacy legislation, record keeping requirements, and others. So again, we're talking about this aspect of conformance, right? It also talks about performance. It assists directors to ensure appropriate operation of assets. So I want to make sure I have the right set of assets. It also talks about the business continuity. It talks about the efficient allocation of resources. Now, if you look closely at the previous slide, we would also had that, which was to optimize resource usage, right? So again, we're always looking for the optimization of our resources, as well as where it talks about cost reduction, and then the realization of benefits, which was also another process within the governance domain in COBIT 5. Now, this standard doesn't have management system in the title, nor does it have the word requirements in it. So it's not intended for certification. So right from the standard, you can see in clause 2.2, it says directors should govern IT through three main tasks. Now, this standard defines director as the member of the most senior governing body of an organization. So that could be your board of directors, but whatever the most senior governing body of your organization, those are the members are called director according to this standard. So the directors are going to do three things, and you can see it. So just like we had in COBIT 5, we have EDM, evaluate, direct, and monitor. So we want to evaluate the current and future use of IT. So how are we currently using IT within our organization, and how do we intend to use it to support our goals and objectives in the future? We also want to direct preparation and implementation of plans. So once we give them the policy, we give them the direction, then it's up to the CIO to take that direction and to create and prepare plans that says how they intend to meet that particular direction. And then, of course, we always want some sort of feedback, and that's where the monitoring comes in. So we want to monitor conformance to policies. Again, the policies are a direction, so that comes to us from the most senior body, right? The directors, as it says here, is going to provide us with some direction. And so we want to make sure that they're following our direction and that they're performing according to the plan that they derived and that was agreed to by the directors. So that's simplistically what the governance model is. But they provide a nice diagram for us that shows graphically what the model is. And you can see at the top, there's our evaluate, direct, and monitor. And you can see off to the left, it says that's the director's activities. So the directors are responsible for the evaluate, direct, and monitor part. And you can see that they're going to use many things like the business strategy and the environment as well. So what's the risk environment? What's our competitive environment? All this information is going to be used, and it's going to be evaluated. Based on our evaluation, we're going to create some direction, and that direction is going to be given in the form of plans and policies. And then off to the left, you see that the business process then will take those plans and policies and translate them into projects and run their operations. Now you see that there's going to be feedback, right? So there's going to be monitoring of some kind where we're going to monitor the performance. As well, there's going to be feedback where they're going to feed back into the evaluation. Right? Now at the bottom you see the 6 principles. So like most of the good standards coming out of ISO, they always provide some principles for us. The first principle is responsibility, which is that individuals have to take responsibility, but they also have to have the authority to carry out, to meet their responsibility, right? So I can't make somebody responsible and not give them the authority to do whatever they need to do. As well, it talks about the need for a strategy. And the strategy takes into account current and future capabilities, as I said previously, and that we have to align the IT strategy so that it meets the business strategy. The next one we see is acquisition. And again, we make acquisitions for valid reasons. So there has to be a good reason in that it meets some sort of objective or goal. There has to be clear and transparent decision making. So we have to be able to trace it. It has to be traceable, right? I have to trace the decision and see that it was transparent and that the right decision was made based on the input data. Right? And there has to be a balance between the benefits, the opportunities, the costs, and the risks. Right? The next thing we see is performance. And generally, if you just want a simple phrase for performance, we can use the words fit for purpose. Any of you people that have the ITIL certified will remember that phrase, fit for purpose, fit for warranty. So here we're talking about fit for purpose. As well, we have conformance as a principle, and that is, as we said previously, compliance with laws and regulations and our own policies. Right? Now, one of the things also that we have as a principle is human behavior. So a lot of the standards and methodologies that people are using, such as this one, but also Lean IT and ITIL and COBIT, talk about the need to demonstrate respect and involve people in the process. So in Lean IT and in Lean generally, they talk about a Gemba walk, which means go to the floor. That the managers should be spending 50% of their time on the floor talking to the people. Right? Now you see a very similar model. This comes from COBIT, and it actually happens to be one of the slides they use to demonstrate one of the principles they have called separating governance from management. So you see at the very top it says we have some business needs. Based on those business needs, just as we saw in the previous slide, we will evaluate it, we'll direct people to do it, we'll be monitoring it, right? And again, here we see the management feedback, and that's to evaluate the current and future use of IT. So we're getting feedback on how it's running now. So the governance, we talk about EDM. When we talk about management, we talk about PBRM, plan, build, run, monitor. So again, it's a simple methodology that we plan to do, we build it, we run it, we monitor it, right? So it's a very simple, but it's also one that demonstrates the alignment between ISO 38500 and COBIT 5. So that's why I chose to use it as a reference framework for the rest of our discussion. So sometimes people are saying, well, that's great, but what do you mean? Well, let's say we try to come up with some simple terms and some simple ideas to sort of get across the difference between governance and management, because it's important to understand the principles and the key differences between the two. So governance focuses on oversight. I give you a policy and I expect you to carry it out, and management will then implement it. Governance authorizes people to make decisions. So I grant you decision rights, and then management has been authorized to make decisions based on the governing body's authorization of decision rights. The governance, or the governing body, whatever that might be, now it doesn't just have to be the board of directors, but it could be your architecture review board, it could be your change advisory board. These are all governing bodies, right? They enact policy. Management enforces policy. Governing body, the governance is accountability, management is responsible. When we're talking about governance, we're talking about strategic planning, and when we're talking about management, we're talking about project planning. And then again, to bring in the resource concept, is when we talk about governance, they're going to allocate resources, and this could be done in the IT steering committee if we're talking about IT. Once we have a strategy, well, there's all sorts of things we can do to carry out our strategy, but we have limited resources, so it's up to the steering committee to allocate resources to the strategy. And then it's up to management to utilize those resources that were allocated to carry out the policy. So again, simple terms, governance is doing the right thing, management is about doing things right. Now just to bring in another principle in COBIT, it talks about meeting stakeholder needs. And they express the value creation as a very simple thing. We have some stakeholder needs which drives value creation, which should be your governance objective. Every organization should have an objective of creating value for its stakeholders. And that's true whether you're a profit, not-for-profit, or any other type of organization. So they define value creation as realizing benefits at an optimal resource cost while optimizing risk. Now you can see on this slide that if we look closely at the top, you'll see that there are 3 particular processes. There they are. EDMO2, ensure benefits delivery. EDMO3, ensure risk optimization. EDMO4, ensure resource optimization. So this is how we provide value to our organization. So we saw EDMO1, which is basically develop our governance framework. We have our 3 value creation, and then we have one that it says ensure stakeholder transparency. So we want to be transparent with our stakeholders. We want to be truthful with them, and we want to show them things. Right? The next slide shows us, again, this is from ISACA, as you can see, where they've taken the domains from COBIT. You can see the EDM, the APO, the DIA, we see the EDM. And as we just saw a few slides back, that's what ISO 38500 focuses on: evaluate, direct, and monitor. As well, we can see ISO 20000 we're going to talk about starts in the align, plan, and organize, because there is the service strategy part of ISO 20000, as well as ITIL 2011. But, you know, a lot of it is, you know, the build, acquire, and implement, and the deliver service and support part. That's the bulk of those standards. You can see ISO 27000, you know, following in a few domains. We can see 31000. So again, you know, I am often asked, is this drawn to scale? No, it's just sort of emblematic of what I've been trying to say up to this point. So again, a simple mapping of it. And this is available in the COBIT 5 framework if you're looking for this particular document. As well, they have a discussion on how they're, you know, how they did this alignment kind of thing. Right? So let's get back. We talked about some of the processes in our governance domain. We talked about the 5 processes very quickly. But let's look at one in particular, which is the concept of risk. And you can see in this framework we have 2. We have EDM03, which is ensure risk optimization that we just talked about. But as well, there is also another specific process called manage risk. So when we go to look at what are the ISO standards, we have a couple that deal with risk. We have Guide 73, which is, applies to every management standard. As well, we have ISO 31000, and we have ISO 27005. Now, 27005 specific to information security risk management, whereas ISO 31000 is a generic. It's a framework for any risk management organization within within any company. And what it really does is it provides principles. So there are principles there that any risk management program would like to use or should use. As well, it gives us generic guidelines on how to do risk management. So there are some simple risk management process. As well, it can be applied to any type of risk, so not just information security, not just IT risk, but it could be applied to reputational risk, credit risk, or any other type of risk within your organization. And again, talking about whether it's positive or negative. So in this document, 31000, we basically define risk as anything that has an impact on meeting the objectives of the organization, which means that it could be an opportunity, a positive risk, or it could be a negative risk, which they call a threat. Now, since we don't see management system or requirements in the title, this is not intended for certification. As I said, there are principles enumerated in the document itself, and there's 3 primary components to the standard. So the principles provide the foundation, and they describe the qualities of effective risk management. On the next slide, we'll see the actual principles. But they give us the why. So why are we doing this? So whenever we're trying to bring change into our organization, we have to think about, you know, we have to have the awareness of what we're trying to do, as well as we have to have the desire. So to get across the awareness desire, we have to explain to people why we're doing anything. So the why is understood by understanding the principles. It helps us understand its importance. In order to get people to change, we must create that awareness, and we must create that desire to change. Okay. The framework, the next part, tells us how we're going to do this. So we have the why, which are the principles. It also tells us who is going to be part of the process, how much it will cost, how long it will take, and the structure of how we will accomplish the assessment and management of risk. So it basically focuses on the how. We build this on a process of continual improvement. Now remember, a lot of these standards focus on continual improvement, and when I get to ISO 27001, I'll talk about plan, do, check, act. Right? And again, we will learn and adapt as we go, another part of our continual improvement program to ensure that we make this a successful process. Right? Then we have the risk management process, which can apply to individual risks, or we can do it on projects, a group of risks, a specific opportunity, a portfolio risk. Again, we can do it on risk of any kind. The same process is followed each time and documented to build consistency. So again, what we're trying to do is to have consistent processes. We want to standardize them, and in this way we bring efficiency into the organization. Again, we can look at the next slide, which sort of gives us a breakdown. So on the left-hand side, we see the principles for managing risk, and I won't go through them, but it's well worth looking at them at some other point in time, because you can see why we're trying to do these things, and it makes sense. In the middle, we have our framework for managing risk. So the first thing we have to have is a mandate. We have to have commitment from executive management to do this. We have to design the framework for managing our risk. We have to then implement, so there's our plan, and then the do part, implement risk management. We then have to check, which is the monitoring and review, and then we do our continual improvement of the framework, which is our act. So there's a simple plan, do, check, act methodology for risk management. And then as well, they give us the process for managing risk, which is enumerated in Clause 6. And again, there is no preference given to any risk assessment methodology. They just say, you know, plug in risk assessment methodology here. So it doesn't matter whether you're using FAIR or Mahari or Octave, we don't really care, because that is another sub-process of the overall risk management process. So simple definition of our risk. So once we understand our risk, then the next thing we have to do is to continue through the framework, and we want to focus on the IT management framework. So that's the very first process within the what we call the management of enterprise IT area, and it's the first process in the first domain within that area. So we have our align, plan, and organize domain with this particular process. So let's look at a standard that ISO provides us to manage the IT management framework. Now there's lots of detailed advice out there. We have ITIL, there's GFIM, there's BISL, there's ASL, but if we want an overall management system, then we have to look at something like 20,000-1. Now you can see that in the title it says Service Management System, and also starts out with information technology. So this is an information technology service management system, and you can see that the word requirements is also there as well. So requirements are documented in the standard using the imperative shall. So wherever you see the word shall, you have to do these things if you intend to get certification. And because these are requirements for a management system, you can get certification. Now, if you've studied ITIL or if you studied this document, then you'll know that they're fairly similar. We have basically 5 group types of key processes. You can see those starting at design and transition of new, going down within the middle square. And as well, you'll see that there is in addition to there being 5, the 4 other group of processes sort of all circle around the control processes themselves. Control processes are used in every one of the other processes, or at least touch out to them. Whenever we want to do anything, we have to look at our configuration management. We have to do changes usually, and those changes have to be released and they have to be deployed. Right? So again, ISO 20000 is primarily used as a demonstration of compliance to accepted best practice. So here's some best practice, which is basically a codification of part of what used to be an older version of ITIL. And it's updated on a regular basis to sort of follow along behind ITIL. Now at the top of this diagram, you see that it says the service management system. So there, like every management system, management has to show responsibility. There has to be some documentation. There has to be resources available. You have to establish the management system. All these things are sort of generic to every management system. But here we also see some of the other processes that we have talked about or will talk about. At the top you see we have to have our governance of processes operated by other parties. So this talks about third parties, but it also talks about the concept of governance, right? We see the term resource management, so we'll talk about resource management. We also see the design and transition of new or changed services. And as well, the last box is information security management. So the next topic, so now we're going to drill down. You can see that information security management is one of the core processes within ISO 27000. So we can drill down on that and look again to our COBIT 5 process reference model and see that COBIT 5 provides two processes to us. One is in the APO domain and one is in the deliver, service, and support. So in the managed security process, we basically do the architecture, the strategy, we do the planning part of security, and down in the managed security services, this is the more operational part. But both of them require a little bit more information. Now COBIT 5, or ISACA, does have a document called COBIT 5 for Information Security, and that's a great document to use in conjunction with ISO 27001. So ISO 27001, you can see that it does say management systems. You can see that it does say management systems, and you can see that it does say requirements. And there are requirements, and these requirements are listed in clauses 4 to 10. And again, like ISO 20000, we see that there are requirements, and they use the imperative shall. So wherever you see that, we need to do it. So we see that in Annex A, there's 14 groups of controls containing 35 control objectives and 113 specific controls. And then because it is a management standards and we do have requirements, an organization can be certified against this standard. Now I said I would get to the Plan, Do, Check Act. In the previous version, the 2005 version of ISO 27001, they actually had the Plan, Do, Check Act model in there. They've taken it out because it basically is an essential part of every one of the management systems. But it still is based on this Plan, Do, Check Act, just as we saw that the ISO 20000 was, and every one of our standards is based on it. So in the plan part, you have to come up with the context of the organization. So again, looking back to when we were talking about risk management, we need to understand the context that we're dealing with. You know, going back to even in the ISO 38500, you know, what's our environment? What industry are we in? Who are our competitors? What are our goals? What are our objectives? As well, management needs to show leadership. We need to do planning for information security management, and there has to be support for information security management. So that's up front in the plan part. And it breaks down further into understanding the organization and its context, the expectations of the interested parties, the scope of the information security management system, and the information security management system itself. The leadership focuses on leadership and commitment. So management has to show commitment. As well, there has to be policy, there has to be a specification of organizational roles, responsibilities, and then going back to our ISO 38500 standard, there's this need for responsibilities and the corresponding authorities. And then final part of planning is that we have to come up with some actions to address our risks and our opportunities, and we have to have some information security objectives and plans to achieve them as well. Support part, well, you need to give them the necessary resources. We have to have competent people. We have to make everybody in the organization aware of the need for information security, and we have to communicate around that need. And as well, there is a requirement for specific documented information. Operations, we have our operational planning control. You have to do a risk assessment, and as part of that risk assessment, I have to come up with a risk treatment plan. The check part is I'm going to monitor, I'm going to measure, I'm going to analyze, and I'm going to evaluate the do part. As well, there is a requirement for internal audit, and there is a requirement for a management review. Now, these are sort of standard things you'll see in every management system standard. And then finally, in every management system standard, you'll see the need for improvement, and that usually revolves around nonconformities and the corrective action for those nonconformities. As well, there is a need for continual improvement. So this is a simple plan, do, check, act, which most of the management systems follow. So moving down, we've covered our security, we talked about risk, we talked about value. The next thing we'll talk about is manage programs and projects. Now, one of the standards we have, and you'll see that there is nothing here saying management system, or it doesn't say requirements, so this is not intended for certification. But we do have guidance on project management. As it says here, it's a high-level concept. So what are good practice? Again, aligned with everything else we've been talking about is we have to align with the organization strategy. So going back to ISO 38500, which came through to us, the ISO 20000, which came through to us, the ISO 27001. So again, we have the strategy. From the strategy, we're going to come up with some opportunities for improvement. That could be to remove barriers, or it could be to improve functionality within the organization. And then we're going to come up with a business case for those opportunities, and then we're going to run a project. And you can see that they focus on the project organization and the project management processes, the product processes, the support processes. But at the end of the day, we have some project deliverables. They're going to help the company operations, that provide benefit to the organization, that support the organization's strategy. And just like we talked about overall governance, here we're going to have project governance. So this will be the running of the project. So again, in Prince 2, they talk about delivering, managing, and operating kind of thing, right? So again, we have these different levels when we talk about projects as well. And very similar to what we see in the PMBOK, you'll see the processes. This diagram shows the process groups. So we have a process group called initiating, which is the authorizing the project or the phase. So we can use this as phases as well, keep coming back and doing an iterative process. As well, we have our planning process group, which defines and refines objectives and selects the best approach based on our plans. Right? And then the next process group is the executing processes, where we actually carry out the plan that we developed in the planning process group. And then we have the controlling processes, where we monitor and measure progress and take corrective action to ensure the project objectives are met. And then the final one is the closing. And you see we can close at any time, but we can formalize acceptance of the project or phase. So this is to show you that we don't have to go to the end. We can always close at some point in time based on our controlling function. So we might shut it down because there's no longer a satisfactory business case, or we can shut it down for a number of different reasons at any point within the process. So a simple methodology aligned with both PMBOK and Prince 2. So now that we've done managed programs and projects, still in the PBRM, Plan, Build, Run, Monitor part of COBIT, we have manage assets, which brings us to our last process, which is ISO 50, or sorry, our last standard, which is ISO 55001. Now 55001 specifies requirements for asset management. And you can see there that it says management system and it says requirements. So the requirements are written using the imperative shall again. So these things you must do. An organization can certify against this standard. So if you want, you can be certified to this standard. The standard itself is pretty simple. We can see at the sort of the base of this is that we have the assets, and the assets are within the scope of the asset management system. So we have a portfolio, and this portfolio is part of the asset management system. The asset management system, just like when we talked about the security management system or the IT service management system, are the interrelated or interacting elements to establish asset management. They include the policy, they give us the objectives, the goals, the processes, the sub-processes, the activities. These are all part of our asset management system. And then we have our asset management, which is the coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from the assets, right? So, the asset management, we want to get some value out of our assets. And then even the larger is we want to manage the organization. So as part of managing the organization, we want to manage the assets. Remember, I started out saying that wherever you had an asset in your organization, you had to have a governance program in place. So we have assets within our organization, and those assets need to provide value to our organization. If they're not providing value in the way they're being used, then we might want to use them in a different way, which might provide value. Once we've identified we have assets, then we need to manage them. So we have to have an asset management system. And as part of our asset management, we have to have a portfolio. So, in almost every other process we've looked at, they talk about databases. You have configuration management database, you have a change database. So this is similar, but we're calling it an asset portfolio, the things that need to be managed. So there are 3 disciplines of asset management. So we have our asset performance management, which is the operational part of it, right? This is where we're going to actually derive value from the asset itself, right? So again, as we're not deriving value, then we go look at using that asset in different ways or disposing of that asset if it's not providing value. As well, we want to do our asset assurance management. So any of you who have studied ISO 20000 or ITIL 2011 or COBIT 5, you know that a very important part of that is to do assurance. So if we say that a particular configuration item is in the configuration management database, we got to prove that it is on a periodic basis. So it's the same thing here. If we say we have an asset, then we want to make sure that there are records that shows that, and that we are compliant with the records. Right? And we also have to interface to internal and external stakeholders. So when we're talking about asset management, you can see that it does dovetail very nicely into our other standards like ITIL, ISO 20000, COBIT 5. All these other things require, asset management. As well, we have our asset portfolio management, which is our high-level planning. As I've said, we have a limited assets in our organization, and we want to get the greatest value out of those assets. So from time to time, we have to look at what do we have and what should we have. So just like your own financial assets, your own financial portfolio, you look at it from time to time and say, well, this is an underperforming dog, and I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to replace it with this particular fund if you're into funds and fund management. So again, it's, we have to do some high-level planning from time to time and say this one should be decommissioned, and we got to bring a new one into the pipeline kind of thing. So again, we're doing our portfolio management to make sure our portfolio is up to date at all times. So I've taken you very quickly through a number of a number of standards, and I tried to align it with the COBIT framework just so you get an idea of why we're doing these things, starting at the highest level with our ISO 38500 and working all the way down. And, we could have looked at our other standards within the ISO framework, or we could have looked at other places like IEEE. But you need to go out and you got to get these things and bring them together and create your own framework within your own organization. Because your organization is a sum of its parts. And we tried to show that to you through the presentation today to say there is an integrated use of these management system standards. And these management system standards are supported by things like project management, asset management, and different things like that. You got to realize that everything in your organization, these parts, are processes. So everything in your organization is a process. And what you're trying to do is to manage these processes using good and best practices that are available to you. And we see examples of what are considered to be best practice when we look at ISO standards. When we look at things like ITIL and COBIT, they tend to be good practices because they're not, generally accepted as the things we need to do in simple environments. You need governance and management processes, simple as that. So if you go back to ISO 38500, that's giving us the definition of what are the governance processes. We had our evaluate, direct, and monitors. So those are governance processes. Then we look at ISO 20000 and we see a number of management processes. I happen to break down one of the management processes, information security management, a little bit deeper by going to ISO 27001. But ISO 27001 is supported by things like ISO 27002, the code of practice, 27003, the implementation standard, 4 and 5, the metrics, and 27005 being risk management. So there are a number of other standards you need to support these ones. But you need governance and management processes in your organization. You create quality products or services in your organization using good and best practices. And you've seen a number of best practices in this presentation today. So if you're interested in these topics, you might want to start developing your personal training plan, because there are a number of things that you need to be aware of to bring together in your organization your own internal control framework. As Lao Tzu once said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and so it's up to you now to start. Britt, do we have time for any questions?
Yes, I just have one question until now, which means that I suppose that everyone understands what you just explained, which is good. So the question is, what is positive risk?
So the way to define it in 31,000 is that you're looking at you're doing your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You're doing your SWOT analysis. So usually our strengths become our opportunities and our weaknesses become our threats to our organizations. So there could be some things that we could benefit from, and we could decide to do these things, or we could share them with third parties. But there are things that have positive impact on our objectives rather than negative impact on our objectives. So I don't know if that, you might be looking at, say, in the IT world, thinking about putting in Windows 10. Now, Windows 10 does have some risks associated with it, but it also has some positive aspects. There's some opportunities, such as it takes advantage of the newer hardware. It takes advantages of newer concepts in software engineering. So there are some benefits to using Windows 10 that you might consider to be positive for your organization.
Okay, thank you for your response. Please, anyone who has any other questions, just write to asia@pcb.com and Mr. Davis will respond to them accordingly. Thank you, Mr. Davis. I think your presentation was really informative and I think the audience agrees as well. So as I said, we'll be extracting all the questions and comments you have regarding the webinar and responding to them. So for all of you interested in GRC, every Wednesday we will have webinars regarding topics of GRC at the same time and same day. So please keep updated by checking our website and other communication channels on our upcoming webinars. Thank you again for your participation. Mr. Davis, if you have something to conclude.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time and interest this day, and maybe we'll talk again in the future. Thanks, Britt.
Thank you very much.